I didn't notice at first. And maybe you haven't noticed either. It was just a slight discomfort. Something almost imperceptible. A small sign that seemed to mean nothing at all. One of those details you catch for a second, and forget in the very next second. I remember exactly the day I took a sip of ice-cold water and felt that quick shock shoot through my tooth. Like a spark. It lasted less than 3 seconds. It passed too fast to seem serious. And I ignored it. Like everyone does. Like I had done 1,000 times before. I put the glass back on the table, and went on with my day as if nothing had happened. But what I didn't know is that small signal was already the beginning of something much bigger. And the problem wasn't in that sip of water. The problem had been happening for years. In silence. Every single day. Inside my own mouth. Without me seeing it. Without me feeling it. Without me suspecting it for even a second. The truth is that we learn from an early age that brushing our teeth is enough. 2 minutes. Twice a day. Maybe 3. Fluoride toothpaste. A good mouthwash every now and then. Done. Problem solved. Obligation fulfilled. But nobody ever explained in any real depth what actually happens when brushing is done the wrong way. Even when it happens every single day. Even when you use the best toothpaste on the market. Even when your teeth feel white, clean, and fresh right after. Because there is an enormous difference between the feeling of cleanliness and actual cleanliness. And it is precisely in that space between the two that the problem grows. That's how, without realizing it, I began entering a slow, silent, and completely invisible process. Teeth don't get sick overnight. That's the point almost nobody understands. We assume teeth just start hurting out of nowhere. That cavities appear suddenly. That the sensitivity you're feeling today showed up this week. But that's not how it works. Teeth are worn down gradually. Microscopically and progressively. Day after day. First, that mild sensitivity appears when you eat something cold or hot. A passing annoyance. It'll go away, you tell yourself. And it does go away. So you move on. Then comes a strange taste that shows up without any explanation. You brush again, rinse, and it disappears. You forget about it. Next, the bad breath that keeps coming back. Even after brushing. Even after using mouthwash. It persists, quietly, like something stubborn living just beneath the surface. And the most frightening part of all? Every single one of these things seems completely normal. I thought it was normal too. I thought sensitivity was just common. That bad breath was just a sign I needed to brush more carefully. That the occasional dull ache didn't mean anything. Until I understood that these signals are actually warnings. Warnings that a process is underway. A process of deterioration that begins long before any real pain appears. And by the time you finally feel pain, it's no longer the beginning. It's the result. Let me tell you something that changed the way I look at this entire subject. The cavity doesn't show up suddenly. It is built every single day, through small mistakes we repeat without even realizing it. The way you hold your brush. The pressure you apply. The duration. The movement pattern. The angle. All of it directly influences the health of your teeth. And here's the point that almost no one talks about openly. You can be brushing your teeth every single day, and still be doing it in a completely wrong way. Not because you're lazy. Not because you don't care. But because nobody ever actually taught you how. Nobody sat down with you and said, "Here is exactly what happens inside your mouth every time you brush, and here's what you're missing." We were handed a toothbrush as children and told to use it. The technique was never really explained. The science behind it was never discussed. And so we developed habits based on guesswork, imitation, and what felt right in the moment. And those habits, we carried into adulthood. And we're still using them today. That was exactly what changed everything for me. When I started paying closer attention, I realized it wasn't just about brushing. It was about how to brush. It was about understanding what actually cleans the tooth versus what only creates the sensation of cleanliness. Because those are two completely different things. Let's talk about what's really happening inside your mouth right now. At this very moment, regardless of when you last brushed, there are bacteria present in your mouth. That's not a sign of poor hygiene. It's biology. The human mouth contains hundreds of bacterial species, and most of them are completely harmless. Some are even necessary. But among them, there are strains that feed on the sugars and carbohydrates you consume throughout the day. And when they feed, they produce acid. That acid, over time, begins attacking the enamel of your teeth, the hard outer layer that protects everything underneath. This process is called demineralization, and it happens every single time you eat, every time you drink anything other than water, every time those bacteria have something to work with. Now, the human body is incredible. It actually has a natural defense mechanism against this process. Your saliva contains minerals, calcium, phosphate, that work to remineralize the enamel after each acid attack. It's a constant battle happening in your mouth without you even noticing. The problem arises when the attacks are more frequent than the recovery. When the balance tips. When the enamel loses more than it gains. And that's where brushing comes in. Proper brushing removes the bacterial film, called plaque, from the surface of the teeth before it has a chance to harden into tartar, before the acid production cycle can cause lasting damage. Done correctly, it gives your natural defenses the advantage. Done incorrectly, it creates the illusion of protection while the damage continues uninterrupted. So what does incorrectly actually look like? Here's what most people don't know. Brushing too hard is one of the most common mistakes people make, and one of the most damaging. There's a widespread belief that more pressure means better cleaning. That scrubbing harder removes more. But the reality is the complete opposite. Aggressive brushing doesn't remove more plaque, it removes enamel. It wears away the very structure you're trying to protect. Over time, it can cause gum recession, which exposes the root of the tooth. And an exposed root is significantly more vulnerable to bacteria, sensitivity, and decay. You don't need force. You need technique. You need patience. And you need consistency. Another mistake is brushing for too short a time. 2 minutes sounds like a minimum, but many people don't even reach that. They go through the motions, hit the front teeth, the ones visible when they smile, and consider the job done. But the back teeth, the gum line, the inner surfaces, they get neglected. And bacteria don't discriminate. They thrive wherever the brush doesn't reach. Then there's the issue of pattern. Most people brush the same areas in the same order every single time, which means they always finish in the same place. And the areas they brush last, when their arm is tired, when their attention is drifting, when they're already thinking about what comes next, get the least attention. Day after day, week after week, year after year, the same spots are underserved. And finally, there is the invisible zone. The space between the teeth. The gum pockets. The very back of the last molars. These are the areas that a toothbrush, no matter how good, simply cannot fully reach on its own. Without additional tools, floss, interdental brushes, water flossers, these zones become permanent hiding places for the bacteria that cause the most damage. This is where gum disease begins. This is where cavities form between teeth, often invisible until they're already significant. This is the silent battleground that most people never address. Bad breath deserves its own conversation, because it is far more misunderstood than most people realize and far more revealing than it seems. The majority of bad breath, roughly 85 to 90%, according to dental research, originates in the mouth itself. not the stomach, as many people believe. Not diet alone. The mouth. Specifically, it comes from the breakdown of proteins by the bacteria living on the back of the tongue, between the teeth, and below the gum line. These bacteria produce sulfur compounds as a byproduct of their metabolic activity. And those sulfur compounds are what create the characteristic unpleasant odor. Here's the important part: mouthwash doesn't solve this. Mouthwash masks it. Temporarily. For an hour, maybe 2. But if the underlying bacterial population isn't being managed through proper mechanical cleaning, brushing, tongue scraping, flossing, the odor returns. Every single time. This is why people who brush twice a day still struggle with bad breath. They're addressing the surface while the actual source remains untouched. Persistent bad breath is a message. It means that somewhere in your mouth, bacteria are accumulating faster than they're being removed. It means there are areas that your current routine isn't reaching. It means the balance has tipped. And it means that the same process generating the odor is likely generating other problems too. Problems that haven't announced themselves with pain yet. But problems that are building, quietly and steadily, toward a moment when they will. Now let's talk about something that most people never connect to their oral health. Your mouth is a gateway to your entire body. This sounds dramatic, but the science behind it is well established and continues to grow stronger with each passing year. The bacteria that live in your mouth don't necessarily stay in your mouth. When the gum tissue is inflamed, a condition called gingivitis in its early stages, periodontitis in its advanced form, the barrier between the bloodstream and the oral environment becomes compromised. Bacteria can enter the circulatory system. Research has linked chronic gum disease to a range of serious systemic conditions. Cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, respiratory infections, adverse pregnancy outcomes, rheumatoid arthritis, Alzheimer's disease. Now, this doesn't mean that poor oral hygiene directly causes heart attacks. The relationship is more complex and continues to be studied. But the association is real, consistent, and significant enough that mainstream medicine has taken notice. Cardiologists now routinely ask patients about their dental health. Endocrinologists working with diabetic patients factor in periodontal status as part of overall disease management. The inflammation that begins in the gums doesn't stay local. It sends signals through the body. It interacts with other inflammatory processes. It has effects that radiate far beyond the tissue where it originates. And it all begins with plaque buildup, with bacteria accumulating in areas that are not being properly cleaned, with small, daily oversights that compound over months and years into something much more consequential. Your teeth are not isolated objects. They are living structures embedded in tissue, fed by blood, connected to a nervous system, embedded in a body that functions as a single, integrated whole. What happens in your mouth matters everywhere else. Let's talk about enamel, because it deserves far more attention than it gets. Enamel is the hardest substance in the human body. Harder than bone. And yet, it is not invincible. And crucially, unlike bone, unlike most tissues in the body, enamel cannot regenerate. The body has no mechanism to rebuild it once it's gone. Every microscopic layer of enamel that is lost is gone permanently. This is why the slow, invisible erosion that happens over years of incorrect brushing, acidic food and drink, and bacterial acid production is so serious. It is permanent damage accumulating silently over a lifetime. Early enamel loss is invisible to the naked eye. You don't feel it happening. There's no pain signal, no visual indication. The tooth looks normal, functions normally, until enough layers have been eroded that the sensitivity receptors in the dentin underneath begin to register temperature changes, pressure, and acidity. That's when the sensitivity starts. And by that point, significant damage has already been done. This is the cruel paradox of dental health. The period when intervention would be most effective, Early, when damage is minimal and truly reversible, is precisely the period when there are no symptoms to prompt action. And by the time symptoms appear and finally motivate a visit to the dentist or a change in habits, the process has already advanced considerably. This is why understanding the mechanics matters. Not to create fear, but to create awareness. To bridge the gap between feeling fine and being fine. Because in dental health, those two things are often very different. There is something called the oral health cycle, and once you understand it, you see everything differently. Every time you eat or drink, the pH in your mouth drops. The environment becomes more acidic. The bacteria become more active. The enamel is under attack. After roughly 30 to 45 minutes, saliva begins neutralizing the acidity. The pH returns to a safer level. The remineralization process resumes. The problem is modern eating habits. Most people in the modern world don't eat 2 or 3 times a day and then give their mouths hours to recover between meals. They snack constantly. They sip coffee throughout the morning. They have a sweetened drink at their desk. They reach for something between lunch and dinner. They have a small bite before bed. Every single one of those moments resets the acid attack cycle. So instead of 2 or 3 acid exposure periods per day, which the mouth's natural defenses can handle, many people are exposing their teeth to 10, 15, 20 acid cycles daily. The remineralization process never gets a proper chance. The damage accumulates faster than it can be repaired. This is not about eliminating all pleasure from eating. It's about understanding what's actually happening and making informed decisions. Condensing eating into defined windows rather than spreading it throughout the day. Finishing with water after eating to help neutralize acid faster. Waiting at least 30 minutes after eating before brushing, because brushing on softened, acid-exposed enamel can actually accelerate the erosion. Small adjustments, based on understanding, that make a genuine, measurable difference over time. I want to address something directly, because it comes up constantly. Whitening. The obsession with white teeth has created a multi-billion-dollar industry, and much of what that industry sells comes at a cost that isn't advertised on the packaging. Many whitening products, especially the stronger at-home strips and gels, work by penetrating the enamel and bleaching the dentin underneath. The result is visually striking. The teeth look dramatically whiter. But the process temporarily increases porosity of the enamel. It can cause significant sensitivity. And used excessively or incorrectly, it contributes to the very enamel erosion we've been discussing. White teeth are not the same as healthy teeth. Teeth that are slightly off-white, slightly yellow, slightly imperfect in color can be structurally sound, bacterially managed, and genuinely healthy. Meanwhile, teeth that appear brilliantly white can be severely compromised underneath. The goal of proper oral care is not aesthetics. The aesthetics follow naturally from genuine health. But chasing aesthetics at the expense of structural integrity is one of the most common and least discussed mistakes in modern dental habits. Health first. Always. Here's what changed everything for me, practically speaking. It wasn't a single dramatic discovery. It wasn't some secret technique that nobody else knows about. It was the accumulation of small, specific adjustments, each individually minor, but collectively transformative. I changed how I held the brush. Angled at 45 degrees toward the gum line, not pressed flat against the tooth surface. Light pressure. The brush doing the work, not my hand forcing it. I changed how long I spent. Not just hitting the 2-minute minimum, but making sure every surface, outer, inner, chewing, gum line, received proper attention. Using a mental map of my own mouth. Rotating through it methodically rather than instinctively. I added flossing as a genuine daily practice, not an occasional habit I did when something felt stuck. Flossing done correctly, reaching below the gum line on both sides of every tooth, not just snapping the floss between teeth and calling it done. I started scraping my tongue. an ancient practice that modern dentistry consistently validates. The bacterial film on the tongue is a primary source of bad breath and a reservoir of the organisms that contribute to tooth decay and gum disease. I became more aware of my eating patterns. Not restricting what I ate, but condensing when I ate. Giving my mouth genuine recovery time between eating windows. And I started paying attention to the signals. Instead of dismissing the brief sensitivity, the occasional strange taste, the morning breath that seemed to linger longer than it should, I started treating these as the communication they actually are. My body sending messages I had spent years learning to ignore. The results didn't come overnight. That's not how biology works. But within weeks, there were changes I could feel. The sensitivity began decreasing. The persistent bad breath that I had privately considered just a part of who I was, gone. The sense of genuine cleanliness that I had never actually experienced before, because I had always mistaken the sensation for the reality. And something even more important than the physical changes, the understanding that I had been carrying a completely preventable problem for years simply because nobody had ever properly explained what was actually happening. If you've made it this far, I think you already know something doesn't feel quite right. Maybe it's the sensitivity you've been quietly managing. The bad breath that embarrasses you even though you brush every day. The feeling that something isn't quite as it should be, even if you can't fully articulate why. That feeling is real. It's not anxiety. It's not paranoia. It's your body, sophisticated beyond comprehension, sending you signals through the only language it has. Physical sensation. Subtle changes. Small, persistent symptoms that don't go away because the underlying process generating them hasn't stopped. And the hard truth is this: the longer those signals go unaddressed, the more the underlying process advances. The more of that irreplaceable enamel is lost. The more the bacterial environment becomes established. The more what was easily correctable becomes structurally significant. But here is the genuinely good news. For the vast majority of people, we are not talking about irreversible damage. We are talking about processes that can be slowed, halted, and in many cases meaningfully reversed. Not through expensive interventions, not through dramatic procedures, but through consistent, correct, informed daily practice. The body has a remarkable capacity for recovery when the conditions that allow recovery are created. Stop the constant acid cycling. Introduce proper mechanical cleaning. Support the remineralization process. Manage the bacterial load. And the mouth, given the chance, will begin moving toward balance. That's not a promise. Every individual situation is different, and nothing replaces a genuine assessment from a qualified dental professional. But the foundational principles are consistent, well-supported, and accessible to everyone. Small changes. Done correctly. Every day. That combination is more powerful than any product on the shelf. More powerful than any procedure in a dental chair. More powerful than any shortcut the wellness industry tries to sell you. Because the basis of lasting oral health is understanding. It's knowing what's actually happening and making choices that align with that understanding rather than against it. I put together everything I learned, and I mean everything, in a practical, clear, step-by-step guide. Not theory. Not complicated science. Practical knowledge that you can apply starting today. The kind of information that should have been taught to us years ago but wasn't. The kind that makes you realize how simple the foundation of genuinely good dental health actually is, once you understand it. You'll find the link in the first link in the description. Click it and take a look. Because the earlier you understand what's happening, the easier it is to interrupt the process before it advances further. You can continue doing what you've always done. You can continue assuming that the sensitivity is normal, that the bad breath just comes with the territory, that the occasional dull ache doesn't really mean anything. You can keep hoping the signals will resolve themselves. Or you can decide that you've ignored them long enough. There is no version of this story where waiting makes things better. The process doesn't pause because you're not paying attention to it. It continues. Quietly. Steadily. Without drama. Until the drama is unavoidable. But right now, right at this moment, there is still time. Time to interrupt the process. Time to give your body the conditions it needs to begin recovering. Time to build the kind of daily practice that means your teeth 5 years from now, 10 years from now, are fundamentally healthier than they are today rather than fundamentally worse. That choice belongs entirely to you. And it starts with one decision, to stop ignoring the signals. If this kind of content speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. Because here we don't just show you the problem. We walk you through the solution. Step by step. With clarity and honesty. Because sometimes the smallest decision to pay attention changes far more than you ever expected.